Shalom, shalom, and thank you for joining me today in this study titled, The Sabbath Day, a Memorial unto Creation. As we walk through this walk, our spiritual walk, the goal is to grow in our understanding. And if you're always in the Word, we get refined. I mean, we have daily refining. And it's funny, even when I do these videos and I'm editing them, the Ruach is still teaching me through them. And it's like, but so as this refining happens, sometimes our ideas change and our understanding broadens. And with that in mind, I thought, well, it's time to start updating some of these older studies that I've done. And the Sabbath one is so important to me. My goal has always been to know the true Sabbath, because that is our Creator's mark. We talk about the mark of the beast, but the mark of our Creator is His Sabbath day, and it is vitally important. So I wanted to do this update on this study on the Sabbath. So I hope you enjoy it, and it helps you as well as it helps me to say these words and to hear these words. Things that maybe you never thought of before, things you've never seen before. And I know that's how, I've read some scriptures probably 100 times. And then one day, this picture appears and it's like, aha, that's what that means. And as we build on our knowledge and our understanding of things, my Torah teacher always told me, it's like peeling away an onion. And each layer you get deeper and deeper into that onion, or you get deeper and deeper into the spiritual understanding of the scriptures. And it's just a natural process. I mean, I'm no better than anybody else. It happens to all of us if we're diligently seeking our Creator's face. That's what He says. I will show you inscrutable things. And He holds true to that. And I give Him praise and glory for that, because it makes it very exciting to be in His Word as these revelations come. So with that said, I want to go ahead and start this study, the Sabbath day, a memorial unto creation. Because JAHUAH rested after 6 days of labor, the Sabbath is also our day of rest and a memorial of creation. Eloah wants us to remember all He did to restore life to our planet. This memorial is so important to our Creator that He made it the fourth commandment, where we are instructed to hallow it. Notably, the Hebrew word kadash, meaning to hallow, is used for the first time in the book of Genesis at the end of creation. Genesis 2:2. And on the seventh day Eloah completed his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. Verse 3. And JAHUAH hallowed the seventh day and sanctified it, because he rested from all his work on it, which Eloah had created to make. Exodus 20 verse 8. Remember the Sabbaths, to hallow it. Exodus 20 verse 11. For in 6 days JAHUAH made heaven and earth, and sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Therefore JAHUAH blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. JAHUAH created many things, but chose only the Sabbath to represent His holiness. Genesis 2:2 and 3 sets the tone and establishes the first reason for Sabbath keeping. That is to follow His example. Because Eloah specifically rested on the seventh day of creation, gives the Sabbath universal validity. It is an example set for us by our Creator Himself, sculpting it into his creation from the beginning, thus making the Sabbath day for all people on earth, for all of us. The scripture clearly states that this was the first counted seventh day of the earth's restoration. Not just a seventh day, but the counted seventh day. I think we tend to forget that. Without a doubt, Exodus 20, 8 through 11 shows that the keeping of it as a day of worship has its foundation firmly anchored in the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2. Exodus 20:10. And the seventh day is the Sabbath to JAHUAH your Elohah. You shall not do any work, you and your sons and your daughters and your male slave and your slave girl and your livestock and your stranger who is in your gates. This means that all who either live with you or are visiting you must observe Sabbath rest on the seventh day. Now, Sabbath does not literally mean to rest, but it means to stop or to cease. Resting is the result of stopping what one does on the other 6 days. JAHUAH could have rested at any time, or he need not rest at all. I mean, after all, he is JAHUAH. For he could have ended the creative cycle at any time, at the end of the 6th day. But he did not. The Sabbath is, in fact, Elohah's final creative act of that week, and the very crown of creation. JAHUAH topped off his creative activities by creating a specific period of time sanctified for rest with him. It was as specifically created as was each task he did on the other 6 days. On the Sabbath, the creating continued. At the end of the creation sequence, JAHUAH created and hallowed an environment to play a major role in producing eternal and everlasting life. Through the creation of the Sabbath, JAHUAH shows that the life-producing process is not complete with just the physical environment. The Sabbath plays an important role in producing spiritual life, a quality of life having a dimension that the physical alone cannot produce. Toward this end, no other day can be devoted to the Sabbath's quality of significance. The Sabbath memorializes the first week of creation, and it sets the cycle of Sabbath weeks until the first Sabbath of creation comes around again in its cyclic trek through Olam time. Everything the Creator does is circular, it's cyclic, including his creation, the creation of the Sabbath weeks. JAHUAH created the Sabbath by ceasing from his physical exertion, setting the example for man also to cease from the normal activities of the other 6 days. He also specifically blessed and sanctified it. He did this to no other day. Yet, men argue against keeping it. I hear so many excuses. Well, nobody knows for sure when it is. Or, oh, it's just for the Jews. Or, oh, my boss just won't let me take the time off. I mean, there's 101 excuses I hear from people who fight against keeping the Sabbath, even though the Messiah himself kept it, like his Father. In fact, the Messiah is called the Master of the Sabbath, and we see that in Matthew 12:8. Our Messiah kept and will keep the Sabbath in the millennium. Yet it truly seems to be the least of the commandments of men. Exodus 31:13 and 14. Speak you also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily, my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am JAHUAH, who does sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone, listen to this, everyone that defiles it shall be surely put to death. For whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Okay, so it says, speak to the children of Israel. Well, who are the children of Israel? This is where I think a lot of people get confused, thinking he's talking only to the Jews. But according to Elohah's word, it is anyone who wants to be his people through the covenant of Abraham. And he is telling them that the Sabbath is a special sign that will be throughout all your generations. That is forever. For the children of Israel, the children who want to be his through the covenant. Not just if you have Jewish blood or are a Jewish convert. Here, the word sign in Hebrew means a monument, token, or evidence. Thus, we are told that the Sabbath is a lasting monument, that is a memorial and evidence that those observing it are worshiping the true Creator as he instructed, following not only the pattern our Creator laid out, but also following the instructions of the Messiah who came to remind us. John 14:15, if you love me, keep my commandments. Verse 21, he that has my commandments and keeps them, it is that one who loves me. And the one who loves me shall be loved by my Father. And I shall love him, and I will reveal myself to him. He's telling us he only reveals himself to the ones keeping the commandments that he has given from his Father. Verse 23, Joshua answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. So he's repeating himself. Anytime the Creator or the Messiah repeats themselves in Scripture, we better really pay attention. Because if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And my Father shall love him, and we will come to him and will make a dwelling place with him. Verse 24, the one who does not love me does not keep my words. That's pretty strong. I mean, he makes it black and white there. You love me, you keep the commandments that I have spoken from my Father. You don't love me, you don't keep my commandments. Pretty cut and dry there. And the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father who sent me. So here Yahshua, the Messiah, is telling us these aren't even my words. I'm just a messenger of my Father. And if you love me like you say you do, then you'll follow these words I'm bringing to you from above. Matthew 12:50, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven, that one is my brother and sister and mother. Wow. They are the children of Israel, just as Scripture tells us over and over again. Yahuwah commands that anyone who works on the Sabbath day be cut off from his true people. The Sabbath, therefore, identifies the true worshipers of Yahuwah. Keeping the seventh-day Sabbath is the difference between worshiping the Creator of this universe and worshiping false man-made gods. For JAHUAH's Sabbaths are fixed on his days, established at creation, and not a Roman day named after a false god, nor the ruler of the night, the moon. Our Creator's Sabbath is not the Sabbath of the Jews, as some have been taught, but a memorial to JAHUAH's work for all mankind. The sacred character of the day is stressed in the following scriptures. Leviticus 19:30 and 26 verse 2. You shall keep my Sabbath, and of my holy things you shall fear. Psalms 2:11. Serve JAHUAH with fear, yea, rejoice with trembling. Psalms 25:14. The secret of JAHUAH is with those who fear him, and he will make them know his covenant. Psalms 90:11. Who knows the power of your anger and how to count out his days because of the fear of your rage? So make known to me your right hand and the ones being corrected in the heart of wisdom. As a lowest people, we must have adequate fear against disobeying his command to seek out the numbering of his days correctly, in order to meet with him at his set times. When we don't, we are subject to the consequences. For something so important as the Sabbath, important enough that it leads to death if we do not observe it, then certainly our Creator has given us a way to know when his true Sabbath is. And I remember even when I was a child, we'd lay in the backyard at night, summer nights, and lay on the lawn and look up at the sky. Back then we used to be able to sleep outside and in our yards and be safe. And we did that a lot in the summertime, me and my siblings. And I'd lay back there looking at the vastness of the heavens and pondering about creation. And I would ask JAHUAH, I called him God back then, but I remember asking him if there was any way for us to know when the real creation week was. And I also remember feeling quite discouraged at the improbability of ever knowing exactly when creation occurred. And therefore, how could we know for sure the true Sabbath? And so that was my quest. It's always been my quest. But happily, now as a grown woman in JAHUAH, he has shown me that yes, he did indeed give us a creation marker. In fact, he tells us about it in the very first chapter of the very first book in the Bible. He gives us a straight path back to his creation-based set times. Hallelujah. Now the question, how do we know for sure which day is the Sabbath, has been debated throughout history. The authority for keeping the Sabbath is shown to us in JAHUAH's own Sabbath rest at creation in Genesis, codified by the fourth commandment at Sinai, acknowledged by the Messiah Yahshua, and referred to continually throughout the entire Bible. The weekly cycle is defined only by the observance of one sacred day in 7. And we see on day 1, JAHUAH created light. He called the light day and the darkness night. On day 2, JAHUAH created the foundation between the waters. He called this foundation heaven. On day 3, JAHUAH created dry land by bringing the waters together. He called the dry land earth, and he called the waters seas. The earth brought forth grasses, herbs, and trees with fruit. On day 4, JAHUAH put the lights in motion as a clock to be used to set the days of his appointments, as well as dividing day from night. Now I find it interesting that on the 4th day of creation, Eloh's timepiece was set into motion. And this aligned, as the priests believed, with the start of the year when the sun is at the fourth gate, which Enoch calls the Great Gate. And the Great Gate in Hebrew is called Gadol Dalet. Dalet is the fourth letter in the Hebrew alphabet, with the numerical value of 4 as well. So are we seeing this pattern here with the fourth day with the number 4? Now, hieroglyphically, Dalet is a door or passageway, but it also conveys the concept of the force or energy which transports us from one state of being to another, or from one year to another. And it is the fourth commandment where we find the only day mentioned in all the 10 commandments, which we are to guard and keep holy. It is a sign marking us as JAHUAH's people. The Creator's cycles, patterns, and his waypoints never cease to amaze me. The greater luminary on the fourth day of creation was given a sign in the fourth gate of heaven. What is this sign? It is the due east rising of the sun, as Enoch tells us throughout his writings. This is the day that the sun filled the tabernacle and later the temple through the east gate. Ezekiel 43 verse 1, and he made me go to the gate that faces eastward. And behold, the glory of Eloah of Israel came from the way of the east. And his voice was like the voice of many waters, and the earth shone from his glory. Verse 4, and the glory of JAHUAH came into the house, the way of the gate facing east. Wow. Psalms 84:11. For JAHUAH Eloah is a sun, S-U-N, and shield. Eloah will give grace and glory. No good thing will be withheld from them that walk uprightly. We see here in Psalms that it says Eloah is a sun, an S-U-N. Of course, this is a metaphor. Interestingly, if we look further at the word sun, Shemesh, in the Strong's Concordance, it has an implication of an east sun rising, a window. This due east rising of the sun produces a straight line shadow, where all other days the shadows are bent, just like King Solomon pointed out in Ecclesiastes. And knowing this information, this knowledge we get from the sun, produces life. It's amazing to me. My brain just goes in overdrive. I'm trying to sort it all out. Matthew 3:3. For this is he, spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the voice of the one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Messiah, make his paths straight. It's about being on the straight path. The straight path marking the fourth day of creation and the start of Eloh's timepiece in the heavens has been forever memorialized in what we call the spring or vernal equinox. 3 days later was the first Sabbath. From the fourth day of creation to the seventh day of creation, where JAHUAH gave us a sign. Jubilees 2, 9 and 10. And Eloah appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth, for days and for Sabbaths, and for months, the Kodesh renewals, and for feasts, and for years, and for the Sabbath of years, and for the Jubilees, and for all the seasons of the years. And it divides the light from the darkness, and for prosperity, all things may prosper, which shoot and grow on the earth. These 3 kinds he made on the fourth day. The fourth commandment tells us to keep the Sabbath day holy. And the seventh commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery. We commit adultery in the eyes of our Creator by worshiping Him on days that were never appointed, offering up praise to wooden idols on plain days, and profaning holy days. What JAHUAH did on the seventh day was to create a memorial of His creative acts. The Sabbath had its origin when the morning stars sang together and the sons of JAHUAH shouted for joy. Job 38:7. For the earth was in harmony with heaven. All was perfect, worthy of its divine author. He rested, not one as weary, but as well pleased with the fruits of His wisdom and goodness and the manifestations of His glory. Now, found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, let me say something here about the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls first were mostly fragments, so a lot of information is missing. And these were a collection or a library of writings. Just as in my own library here at my house, I have books that I may not agree with completely. In fact, one time I spent like $25 on this book because there was one paragraph that spoke to me about the Creator's division of days and the circular motion of it. But there are records within the scrolls, because many things were found in the scrolls. The book of Enoch, the book of Genesis, the book of Deuteronomy, a lot of things were found in the scrolls. But there were also records of what the priests did in their priestly order and how they did things. The schedule of the temple. And this is important information that gives us an insight to what the priests were doing and how the calendar worked out. Is it the number one authority? Of course not. Scripture is number one authority. Scripture tells us how the Sabbath is to be kept. Tells us it's on the seventh day. Gives us lots of insight on the calendar. But the book of Enoch, which is still in the Ethiopian Bible and was originally in the canon until the priests changed the calendar, and so they had to do away with it because it would expose their lies. They took it out of the canon, but it is still in the Ethiopian Bible. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, I just want to make the point that they're not the number one authority. Scripture is. Inspired word is. But they do lend to give us an insight to what these records and what the priests were doing. So, found within the Dead Sea Scrolls is a parchment of the 13 weekly Sabbath sacrifice songs, which were rotated through each of the 4 quarters of the calendar year. So without difficulty, we can look at these records and see the pattern of the Sabbaths. And this isn't the only scroll that had this pattern of the Sabbaths. Throughout the scrolls, we see the same pattern of Sabbaths reoccurring in the records pertaining to the temple. And it's said that the weekly Sabbath for the first month falls on the 4th, 11th, 18th, and 25th day. In the second month, the Sabbaths are on the 2nd, 9th, 16th, 23rd, and 30th day, as there are always 5 Sabbaths in the second month. Finally, the third month, the Sabbaths are on the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th. And in scrolls 4Q400 and 4Q401, it plainly conveys when many of the Sabbaths occurred, making it simple for us to fill in the blanks. And as the scrolls tell us that the first Sabbath of the year was on the 4th day of the month, being that the Sabbath is day 7 of the week, this is vital information, as it confirms to us that the priests began the year on day 4 of the week, as aligned in Genesis 1:14 through 19. On the 4th day, the lights started to mark time. So we understand from Genesis, from the Bible itself, that the lights began to mark time on the fourth day of creation. The Creator made his works to be remembered. His creative acts are to be studied, and JAHUAH gave us the seventh day as a day of remembrance. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The Sabbath commandment is the only one that starts with the word remember, as it is a memorial to all JAHUAH's creation on the first week. Numbers 10:10. Also in the days of your gladness, and in your solemn days, and in the beginnings of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices of your peace, that they may be for you a memorial before your Creator. I am JAHUAH, your Creator. Numbers 10:10 is telling us that the Sabbaths, the feast days, and the Rosh Chodesh are all memorials to the original creation cycle. So this is where the debate is. We are told in Scripture that the Sabbath is to be every seventh day. The illustration given is the seventh counted day from day one of creation, as creation sets the example of a week. Some believe this to mean that the counting of sevens is perpetual and never ending, regardless of the fact that the feast days do, from time to time, break up at least the 6 days of work and are considered a Sabbath within their own right. So why then do we think that the Sabbath is counted differently than any of the other annual memorials listed in Leviticus 23? The only thing that is perpetual about the Sabbath is its covenantal power. It is a perpetual covenant between true worshipers and their Creator. Exodus 31:16, and the sons of Israel shall guard the Sabbaths to observe them unto their generations. It is an eternal covenant with me and the sons of Israel. It is an eternal sign. For in 6 days the Creator made the heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased and rested. JAHUAH lays out the pattern of his days at creation. By observing any other day, we put ourselves outside the promise and blessings of JAHUAH's day of rest. But some tell me about the Sabbath that no one knows for sure the right day. So to that I would answer, we do know, because JAHUAH is telling us. We just need to listen. JAHUAH taught his system of dividing days to man through the Torah, his prophets, the inspired writings of Enoch and Jubilees, also by the natural order of the movement of the heavens, now verified through the Dead Sea Scrolls. Throughout the Scriptures, we are instructed to memorialize different events. The Passover, for example, is honored year after year on its fixed 14th day of the month. Exodus 12:14, and the day shall be a memorial for you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to JAHUAH in your generations. You shall celebrate it as a law forever. Verse 18, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. Thus each year, even into the millennium after the Messiah has returned, the Passover will be memorialized at its fixed appointed time year after year. When the moon is used to set these important dates, they will wander through the calendar. But when we use the creation calendar of our Eloah, we are guaranteed that the set dates are the originals in which we are to memorialize. How do we then follow the memorial days just as they are presented in the beginning? If we never let creation set the Sabbath cycle of 7, then the Sabbath will not align with the original cycle. there is only one creation cycle, one original cycle of 52 weeks of Sabbaths to be memorialized. Because of sin, which was the reason for the flood during Enoch and Noah's day, the earth was knocked out of its rotation, and the additional solar days were the result. As the earth prepared for the waters of the deep to rise, earthquakes were so terrible and frightening that Noah approached Enoch in fear that he would die from all the movement that was happening. So how did Noah see that the earth was tilted? By the signs in the heavens. The heavenly lights had changed from Noah's perspective on earth. The stars that he commonly saw from night to night were moved, or perhaps not even in view anymore. Without this tilt, the fourth day sign would not exist, nor would it even be needed, which is the reason I believe that our Creator tilted the earth just as he did, knowing that going forward, this would be a time of great sin, a time that people forgot his ways, just as he testified. Therefore, out of his desire to meet with us on his set days, he left a banner, a marker, a sign in the heavens so that we would never lose the Sabbath of creation. On the heavenly tablets, the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feast of the covenant. So he gave us this sign on the fourth day of creation via the greater luminary that's a part of the heavenly tablets, so we wouldn't forget the feast of his covenant. The greatest feast of his covenant is the Sabbath, which is a mark of his people. Days 365 and 366 of the solar cycle were never part of the original creation. Thus, Eloah never assigned a place for them in the calculation of the year, and yet taught Enoch how to include and reckon time with them in the circuit of days. All the memorials are annual, as listed in Leviticus 23, and begin anew following the Genesis 1 story, cycle after cycle. It is merely that the annual set days of the creation Sabbaths just happen to be every seventh day, instead of a single day or a week each cycle. Thus, the confusion of this never-ending count of 7. They're just memorials. The Sabbath is as annual as every other appointed time. And although the Gregorian day of Saturday seems to be fixed in its day of the week, it actually wanders through the counted days, never landing on the same counted day twice in a row. And isn't our instructions, after all, to number days and not name them after false gods? I would like to address for a moment the word Sabbath itself. Now, some have come to believe that the word used for Saturday is equivalent to the word for Sabbath, because in many cultures, there's a similar sounding word that has come down through time. Thus, they believe that this is proof that Saturday was never lost as the seventh day Sabbath. Now, I hear this reasoning from time to time on why someone is keeping a Saturday Sabbath. And I think sometimes it's just because they don't know the history, or they don't want to give up their fellowship. Fellowship is so important, and this is why this walk seems sometimes lonely. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that Saturday did not retain its seventh day place. These words are based on the Babylonians' lunar calendar. Now, Sebutu is where the Hebrew word Seba, or seven, is derived from, and not Shabbath, which is the root word from which Sabbaton, or Sabbath, comes from, as it simply means seven, or the seventh day of whatever calendrical system they used, be it solar, lunar, or a combination. Now, the name for the Babylonian 15th day of the lunar month, the day of the full moon, Sabbath, was derived independently from their numerical system. According to Akkadian text, Shaputu was the full moon day. This word can also be read as Sapatu or Sabatu. The significance of this resemblance to the Hebrew word Sabbat has long been debated. It is most likely, according to scholars, that the Hebrews adopted the word Shapatu, the full moon day Sabbath of the Babylonians, to mean Sabbath in general, then applied it to their own seventh-day Sabbath. Now, Professor Albert T. Clay, he was an American professor of Assyriology and Babylonian literature at Yale University. He was a historian and Semitic linguist. And in 1923, he wrote, and I quote, "The Hebrews transformed the Mesopotamian cultic calendars honoring the moon god of the Chaldees and Haran and the days of rest associated with these cults into days of rest for Eloah and his people. The day of the new moon originally was the day the moon god reappeared after resting in the underworld, it being the first day of the ancient lunar month, and out of view due to its nearness to the sun. The 15th day of the lunar month, the day of the full moon, was associated also with the day that the gods rested. Israel's sacred moon rest days were descended in part from Mesopotamian lunar ritual exemplars." Unquote. These Babylonian moon days were reestablished when the temple and the position of the high priest was sold to the highest bidder during the time of the Hasmonean revolt. Solomon tells us that there's nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes 1:9. And this return to pagan traditions, despite the punishments getting harsher and harsher, was a chronic habit for the Hebrews throughout history. After the Israelites made the golden calf at Mount Sinai, a false feast was declared to honor JAHUAH. "Tomorrow is a feast to Eloah," proclaimed Aaron, the brother of Moses. This was not a true appointed feast of JAHUAH, but rather the deity Saturn, in which the calf was a symbol. This feast took place on Saturn's Day, which was the day the Egyptians worshipped their gods and the beginning of the Hebrews worshiping Saturn's Day outside of the bondage of Egypt. Exodus 32:8. They have quickly turned off from the way. Remember, we're people of the way. And they have quickly turned off from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a casted calf and have bowed to it and have sacrificed to it. And they have said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Exodus 32:5. And Aaron saw, and he built an altar before it. And Aaron called and said, "A feast to JAHUAH tomorrow." So it is true that the Israelites did bring the Saturday Sabbath out of Egypt with them. But was it the one true Sabbath of Eloah? That answer would be a resounding no. The false feast of Apis the bull, which represented the god of Saturn, was instituted as an appointed time to meet and worship JAHUAH, a time that he considers to be blasphemous. Just as it is in modern times, false Sabbaths are erected according to the Babylonian pagan week. They are then dedicated to Eloah, offering up strange fire to him. JAHUAH's set times for his annual feast and Sabbaths have been counterfeited by Babylon. Who instituted it? The man of sin, who has sought to change times and laws. Daniel 7:25. Bet you knew I was going there, didn't you? And he shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he intends to change times and laws. Well, we can see that he has actually done that over and over again to cause confusion, to confound the saints. The world has turned from the true living Eloah to serve their idols. As we will see, JAHUAH continually condemns Satan's counterfeit Sabbaths throughout the scriptures, for they do not bear his signature. The book of Jubilees also prophesies again and again regarding these counterfeit ordinances. Moses is warned by Eloah that the people will forsake JAHUAH in the promised land. Many will be destroyed and taken captive. They will fall into the hands of the enemy because they have deserted my ordinances and my commandments and the festivals of my covenant. It's all about the covenant. And my Sabbaths, which I have sanctified, separated, set apart for myself among them. From the very first week of this creation, JAHUAH promised to meet with his people at a set-aside time. But they deserted the annual festivals and weekly Sabbaths of JAHUAH's covenant. Jubilee 6:34. And all the children of Israel will forget, and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the renewals. That's the Kadesh, the monthly renewal. And seasons, this word is moed, the appointed times, the feast times, and the Sabbaths. Jubilee 6:35. And they will go wrong as to all the orders of the years, the Jubilees. For I know, and from henceforth I will declare it unto thee. And it is not of my own devising, for the book lies written before me. On the heavenly tablets, the division of days is ordained. On the heavenly tablets, the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feasts of the covenant. So he put this marker in the heavenly tablets, so we will not forget the placement of his feasts. That's what he's telling us right here. I gave you a mark. I put him on the heavenly tablets, so you will not forget. And again, it is all about being in covenant with our Creator. Hebrews 8:10. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, says JAHUAH, I will put my law into their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be to them an Eloah, and they shall be to me a people. And remember, who's the house of Israel? But those wanting to be JAHUAH's through the covenant of Abraham. Those are the people that will have the laws written on their minds and hearts. Not just any Joe sitting in a pew on Saturday or Sunday. It's those that are dedicating themselves to following Yahuwah's commands. That is when he writes it in our mind and in our hearts. Remember, the house of Israel was scattered amongst the nations. It is the nations who then become Israel, like I said, through the covenant of Abraham, extended to all who want to be marked as Yahuwah's people by having the Torah always in the forefront of their minds and actions. Since the Sabbath is that sign that we are Eloh's children, if we then reject his Sabbath, then aren't we rejecting Eloah as our father? And since the Sabbath is the sign that it is Eloah that sanctifies us, if we reject his Sabbath, aren't we also rejecting his sanctification? Something to think about there. The Israelites wandered for 40 years, and because of her continued disobedience and adultery, the ecclesia has wandered 40 jubilees through the wilderness without knowledge of the proper appointed times of Yahuwah. For there are still 40 years before you for learning the commandments of Eloah until you cross the border of the land of Canaan, crossing the Jordan on the western side. Thus, jubilees will pass until Israel is purified from all the sins of fornication. Okay, well, a jubilee is 50 years. Yet here we see that he's saying it's a plural. Many jubilees will pass until Israel is purified. Now, Jeroboam becomes the first king over the house of Israel and proceeds to eradicate the set time ordinances of Yahuwah and install instead the false feasts of Apis, the bull of Memphis, Egypt. The same false feasts set up at Mount Sinai. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 12, starting with verse 26. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom shall turn back to the house of David. So now Judah and Israel have been separated. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of Yahuwah at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people shall turn again to Eloah, to Rehoboam, the king of Judah, and they will kill me and go again to Rehoboam, the king of Judah. Verse 28, and the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Sound familiar? Verse 29, and he set one in Bethel, and he put one in Dan. So Yahuwah now is so angry and fed up with these false feasts, he condemns the Hebrews to worship the hosts of heaven, the tabernacle of Saturn, which they had made, thus the false Saturday Sabbath. Amos 5, starting with verse 1. Hear the word of Yahuwah, which I take up against you, a lamentation. The house of Israel fell, no longer should it proceed to rise. Verse 2, fallen is Israel the virgin, never to rise again. Never to rise again. Wow. She is abandoned on her own land with no one to raise her up. Verse 4, for this is what Eloah says to the house of Israel, seek me and live. Verse 5, but do not seek Bethel, do not go to Gilgal, and do not pass over to Beersheba, because Gilgal will surely go into captivity, and Bethel will come to nothing. Verse 6, seek Eloah and live, otherwise he may break out like a fire in the house of Joseph, and devour Bethel, and there will be no one to extinguish it. Amos is stating that there is not a God at Bethel that can put out this fire that JAHUAH is sending upon the house of Joseph for defiling his Sabbath. He goes on to describe that it is JAHUAH who created the stars. In other words, they were not to worship the stars, but were to worship the one which created them. Verse 21, I despise your feast days, and I will not delight in your solemn assemblies, in your Sabbaths. Verse 22, though you offer me burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not be pleased, nor will I regard the peace offerings of your fat animals. This kind of reminds me of what Samuel said to Saul when he disobeyed Yahuwah's instructions, that obedience is better than sacrifice. Amos 5:23, take away from me the noise of your songs, and I will not hear the melody of your stringed instruments. Now Amos 5:25 and 26 reveals that in the wilderness, even after all the miracles Israel witnessed, they still returned to worship false gods. Amos 5:25, did you bring to me sacrifices and offerings during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? Verse 26, and you took up the tent of Molech and the star of your God. Now this was the wandering star Saturn, which was called Remphan, the impressions of them which you made for yourselves. They made themselves idols and worshipped them. Now the phrase took up in Hebrew is nasa. Now nasa does not mean to be deceived. That's nashah. But nasa means to bear up, suffer, receive. But it can also mean to be intimate with or to marry. Amos declared that Israel had set up an idolatrous shrine, that is, a false feast dedicated to Saturn. Now, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia also identifies Remphan as the Babylonian name for the god of the planet Saturn, and translates Amos 5:26 as, quote, and you carried the tent of your king, and Saturn, your star god, idols that you crafted for yourself, unquote. They worshipped in the tabernacle of Saturn, declaring Saturn to be their king and star god. Thus, JAHUAH delivers them up to marry, that is, to be intimate with Saturn and suffer the consequences for their idolatry. Acts 7, starting with verse 38. This is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the living words to give us. Verse 39, and to whom our fathers would not be obedient, but thrust him away and turned back again to Egypt in their hearts, saying to Aaron, make gods for us who will lead the way for us. As for this Moses who led us out from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. Thus they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifices unto the idol and rejoiced in the works of their own hand. Lifting up the tabernacle of Saturn was a direct affront to Eloah. Therefore, he condemns Israel to Babel and the worship of their idols, the hosts of heaven. Omri, king of the house of Israel and the father of Ahab, continued these false feasts and walked in all the customs that Jeroboam had installed, as related in 1 Kings. Ahab, the son of Omri and husband of Jezebel, became king after his father died, and was even more evil than his ancestors, walking again in the sins of Jeroboam. The New Unger Bible Dictionary states that this corruption was so strong that it appeared as if the true knowledge of JAHUAH would be lost to Israel forever. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of JAHUAH above all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah pole, and Ahab did more to provoke JAHUAH the Eloah of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. The people fell further and further away from JAHUAH's set time ordinances and his one true Sabbath. His judgment is directed against those who profane his Sabbath. Because Israel would not hallow the Sabbath, they were scattered amongst the nations and given over to worship their foreign gods. Ezekiel 20, verse 13. My Sabbaths they greatly polluted. Then I said I would pour out my fury upon them in the wilderness to consume them. Verse 16. Because they rejected my rules and did not walk in my statutes, and profaned my Sabbaths, for their hearts went after their idols. Verse 17. Nevertheless, my eye spared them, and I did not destroy them or make a full end of them in the wilderness. Verse 18. And I said to their children in the wilderness, do not go in the laws of your fathers, and do not keep their ordinances, and do not intermingle with their practices, and do not be defiled. Verse 19. I am JAHUAH your Eloah. Go by my orders, and keep my ordinances, and do them. And keep my Sabbaths holy. So, if he's telling the children to keep his Sabbaths holy and not to go in the way of their fathers, then obviously the fathers were not keeping the Sabbath holy, that they may be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am JAHUAH your Eloah. Verse 21, and they rebelled against me, and their children went not by my orders, and my ordinances they guarded not to do them, which if a man does, then he shall live by them. And my Sabbaths they profaned, and I spoke to pour out my rage upon them, and to complete my anger against them in the wilderness. And I turned my hand against them, and I acted because of myself, so that my name should not be thoroughly profaned before the nations, from whom I let them out before their eyes. Verse 23, and I lifted up my hand against them in the wilderness to disperse them among the nations and to scatter them in the places. JAHUAH brought the Hebrews out of captivity with his hands wide open to receive them and gather them to him as his chosen people to serve as priests before him. Now, hands facing open towards someone is a sign of welcoming friendship. But because they profaned his Sabbath and did not follow his ordinances, he turned his open hand to the backside in order to sweep them away like crumbs on his table, dispersing them among the nations rather than destroying them completely. Verse 24, because they did not observe my ordinances and profaned my Sabbaths, and their eyes were after the thoughts of their fathers, I gave them up to orders that were not good, and ordinances which they shall not live by. Wow. He says, I gave them orders not good. Since they would not follow my orders that were good, I gave them up to follow their father's ordinances, which were not good. Pronouncements spiritually corrupting, leading them away from everlasting life. So when he says that we will die, that not following his ordinances leads to death, or not following his Sabbath or working on his Sabbath, you will die, it's not like he's going to instantly strike you down. What he's talking about is your everlasting life. Are you going to have the everlasting death or the everlasting life? That's what he's talking about here. Do we want everlasting life with him? So here we see that he is turning them over to this corruption, which does lead them away from the everlasting life. And we find this pronouncement in Amos. Remember that JAHUAH turned Israel over to their star god Saturn. And Amos says, take away from me the noise of your songs, and I will not hear the melody of your string instruments. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This pronouncement was not lifted and remained as long as Israel served their star god Saturn. It remains today. In Nehemiah's day, the people had once again lost the true Sabbath and feasts, but JAHUAH was restoring it to them, as he had done time and time again with his chosen people. Let's go to Nehemiah chapter 1, starting with verse 8. I beseech you, remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you act unfaithfully, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you turn to me and keep my commandments and do them, though you were cast out into the outermost part of the heaven, yet I will gather them from there, and I will bring them to the place that I have chosen to set my name there. And Nehemiah the governor, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites, who taught the people, said to all the people, this day is holy to JAHUAH your Eloah. Do not mourn or weep, for all the people wept when they heard the words of the law, when they realized how they have been wrong and been disobedient in his words. They wept. They wept when they heard the truth. Nehemiah 13, verse 14. Remember me, O my El, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds, which I have done for the house of my Eloah, and in its keeping. In those days I saw in Judah once treading winepresses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading asses, and also wine, grapes, and figs, and all burdens they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them on the day they sold food. Verse 16. Men of Tyre also lived in it, who brought fish and all wares, and were selling on the Sabbath to the sons of Judah, even in Jerusalem. And I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said to them, what is this evil thing that you do, defiling the Sabbath day? Verse 18, did not your fathers do this, and did not our Eloah bring all this evil on us, and on this city? Yet you bring more wrath on Israel by defiling the Sabbath. And it happened when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath. I commanded that the gates should be shut, and commanded that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I stationed some of my servants at the gates, so that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. Verse 29, remember them, O my Eloah, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Remember, our Eloah wants us all to be his priests. That was his initial plan, and that plan was never given up on. He is calling us out of the nations to be his priests. Just as disobedience is punished, obedience does not go unrewarded. As most of the world suffers trials and difficulties because of its carnal ways, blessings and protection are promised to those who are keeping the Sabbath. Isaiah 56, starting with verse 1. So says JAHUAH. So says JAHUAH. This is a command or an ordinance. So says JAHUAH, keep justice and do righteousness. For my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who lays hold on it, keeping Sabbath from defiling it, and keeping his hand from doing every evil. Verse 3, and do not let the son of a foreigner speak. He who joins himself to JAHUAH, saying, separating JAHUAH separates me from his people. And do not let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. For so says JAHUAH to the eunuch who keeps my Sabbaths and choose things I am pleased with, and take hold of my covenant. I, even I, will give to them in my house and in my walls a hand and a name better than sons and than daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. So he's saying even the eunuchs were like the lowest rung because they could not reproduce. So they were thought to be unpure because they couldn't reproduce. But he's telling them that even the eunuchs are welcomed and are given this special everlasting name if they do my Sabbaths and do the things that please me, that pleases JAHUAH. Verse 6, and the sons of the alien who join themselves on JAHUAH to serve him and to love the name of JAHUAH, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath. He's saying everyone. Everyone means everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath and takes hold of my covenant. Even then I will bring them to my holy mount and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Today we still have sacrifices and offerings to give him. This walk can be a great sacrifice. Sometimes we might even have to give up our chosen careers to follow the Sabbaths of creation. It's not an easy walk, but JAHUAH promises us great things if we do it, if we endure the hardships of it. So he says, for my house shall be called the house of prayer for all peoples, states the Eloah JAHUAH, who gathers the outcasts of Israel. I will yet gather beside him his gathered ones. Now, when I read that, I will yet gather beside him his gathered ones. Joshua tells us that he protected and saved those that his father gave him, the lost sheep of Israel. So this is who he's talking about. He will gather beside him his gathered ones. So Yahuwah is going to gather the lost sheep of Israel, those that want to be in covenant with him, and he gives them to the Messiah for safekeeping. This undeniable truth is the beauty of doing what Yahuwah commands. He rewards us richly for doing so. When we offend him, adverse consequences are just as sure. But as history often repeats itself, this reformation was brief, and Israel once again fell away from Yahuwah and his set times, as we read in the small but mighty book of Malachi. Malachi 1, starting with verse 6. The son honors his father, and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? Says JAHUAH Sabbath to you. O priests who despise my name, but you say, in what have we despised your name? Verse 7. You are offering defiled food on my altar, and you say, in what have we defiled you? It is in your saying, the table of Yahuwah is to be despised. Verse 11. For from the east to the west my name shall be great among the nations, and everywhere incense shall be offered to my name, and pure food offerings. For my name shall be great among the nations, says JAHUAH Sabbath. Malachi 1 verse 11 is very significant. Far away from Jewish altars, Yahuwah's name will be revered in Gentile lands. These words remind me of Acts 10, 34 and 35, where it says, and opening his mouth, Peter said, Truly, I see that Eloah is not one who discriminates, but in every nation, the one fearing him and working righteousness is acceptable to him. If you will not hear, and if you will not set it on your heart to give glory to my name, says JAHUAH Sabbath, then I will send the curse on you, and I will curse your blessings. And indeed, I have cursed it, because you are not setting it in your heart. Our Eloah here is speaking as JAHUAH Sabbath, usually translated as of hosts, but these hosts are the hosts of his armies. Sabbath is Yah's war hat, and we need to be listening. Whenever he speaks as Sabbath, he is not very happy. Malachi 2 verse 3. Behold, separate to you the shoulder, and I will disperse dung of the large intestine upon your faces. Dung of the large intestine on your holiday feasts, and I will take you away at the same time. Now, to separate you to the shoulder means to cast the shoulder or to turn their back upon you. So you're casting your shoulder, you're turning your shoulder towards them, you're showing them your back. Oh, sorry about the lighting. So it's to turn your back. It's a sign of causing a separation. He's separating himself from them by turning his shoulder towards them. He's turning away from them. So the Creator not only is turning his back on them, but he is also smearing them and their false holidays with dung. Now, years ago, I used to own a porta potty company. For many years, I had that company. And so back then, Yahuwah told me I was standing at the dung gate. I was learning about all the dung of humanity. And I stood there for about 13 years at the dung gate. And the things that JAHUAH showed me through that company. But I'll talk about that maybe another time. It's just amazing. He's saying, I'm going to smear this uncleanness all over your face and all over your feast days. Whoa. I know the first time I read that, I'm like, JAHUAH does not beat around the bush when he is angry. So remember, I said he's speaking as Sabbath. He's very angry. Malachi 2:8. But you have turned out of the way. Again, remember, we're people of the way. But you have turned out of the way. You have caused many to stumble at the law. He's not saying the law is wrong. He's saying the way you had them follow it, you made them stumble. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says JAHUAH Sabbath. Now the priests should have held the word of Eloah in knowledge, reverence, and obedience. Instead, they departed from the way, and therefore caused many to stumble, making up their own rules as they went along. JAHUAH then goes on to rebuke Judah for profaning the covenant. So earlier we talked about how he came up and rebuked the house of Israel, and now he's rebuking Judah. I'm often told we're supposed to follow Judah because they have all the truth. And yet here JAHUAH rebukes them, and he says, Malachi 2:11, Judah has dealt treacherously and has done an abomination in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah has profaned the holy place of JAHUAH, which he loves, and has married a daughter of a foreign god. Malachi 3:6, for I, JAHUAH, change not. Because of this, you sons of Jacob are not destroyed. Verse 7, from the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says JAHUAH Sabbath. But you say, and what shall we return? Malachi 3:16. Then those who feared JAHUAH spoke with one another. JAHUAH paid attention and heard them, and a book of remembrance was written before him of those who feared JAHUAH and esteemed his name. Verse 17. They shall be mine, says JAHUAH Sabbath, in the day when I make up my treasured possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his son who serves him. So not all of Judah was returned to him, only those who feared him and esteemed his name. Verse 18, then once more you shall see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves Eloah and the one who does not serve him. Malachi 4:2, but for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. Now I find it interesting that the word S-U-N, son, is used in this verse instead of S-O-N, son, in conjunction with healing. The Son, S-O-N/S-U-N, that heals would of course be the Messiah, the tree of life, the living waters. So let's fast forward now to the time of the Messiah. Now and then I will have someone tell me that Saturday is the correct Sabbath because the Messiah never came up over the Pharisees and their Sabbath, which at the time of the Messiah, the Saturday Sabbath, they were following the Julian calendar. So the first thing we need to understand that just like Christianity, Judaism has different sects with their own ways of doing things. Not all Jews do things alike, which is one of the reasons the sons of Zadok stopped going to the temple for feasts and Sabbath services. When the priesthood got sold out from under them and the calendar changed, this caused many disagreements among the groups as they could no longer celebrate the holy days together. The sons of Zadok followed the priestly solar creation calendar, the calendar of creation, and not the lunar reckonings of the new leaders. Throughout Scripture, we find the Messiah, himself being our high priest, coming up over the false priests and their Babylonian-based Saturday Sabbaths, speaking harsh words to them all. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes, and sometimes he calls them the Jews, he calls them sons of hell. They, in turn, accuse the Messiah of untying their Sabbath and not doing their Sabbath at all. So let's go to John chapter 5, starting with verse 1. And after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Joshua went up to Jerusalem. Verse 5, and a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. Seeing him lying, and knowing that he had already spent much time, Joshua said to him, Do you desire to become well? Well, of course. I mean, he's going to say yes. Why wouldn't he? He's been there for a lot of years trying to get well. Verse 10, Then the Jews said to the one having been healed, It is a Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to lift up the cot. Verse 11, And he answered them, The one making me well, that one said to me, Lift up your cot and walk. Verse 15, The man went away and told the Jews that Joshua is the one making him well. And because of this, the Jews persecuted Joshua and lusted to kill him, because he did this thing on a Sabbath. So now let's pay close attention to this one point Joshua's going to make here. Verse 17, But Joshua answered them. He said, My father works until now, and I work. Joshua is making a proclamation that he works on the days his father JAHUAH allows, not on the days dictated by the Pharisees and their false calendar. The Messiah made it clear to them that he works on the days that his father himself worked, and that this day was in fact a work day, and not one of his father's rest day Sabbaths. Therefore, since his father worked on this day, so shall he. John 5:18. On account of this, then, more the Jews sought to kill him. For not only he untied the Sabbath, he also called Eloah his own father, making himself equal to Eloah. So we see that the Jews sought to kill him because, one, and first, he untied their Sabbath. And secondly, he said he was the son of Eloah. Now, the Thayer's definition for untied is lu, and it means to dissolve anything bound, tied, or compacted together. Dismiss, break up, annul, subvert, do away with, deprive of authority, whether by precept or act, declare unlawful, to loosen what is compacted or built together, to break up, demolish, destroy, to dissolve something coherent into parts, metaphorically, to overthrow, to do away with. Now, the Strong's Concordance tells us to compare this word with G4486. And that word means to break, wreck, or crack. That is, especially to sunder. Now, sunder, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, means to break apart or in two, separate by or as if by violence or by intervening time or space. So the Messiah destroyed, he dissolved, he sundered the Jewish Sabbath. And this is why they wanted to kill him. Continuing with John 5, and the Messiah telling the leaders at the temple that today was not a feast day rest of his Father. Verse 19, then JAHUAH answered and said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son is not able to do anything from himself, except what he may see the Father doing. For whatever that one does, these things also the Son does likewise. Again restating that this is a work day for his Father. The Messiah was a Nazarite, not a Pharisee nor a Sadducee. A Nazarite was a sect associated with the sons of Zadok, who still followed the ancient path and the priestly calendar based on creation. You can see our study, JAHUAH the Nazarene, on this. And he wasn't called a Nazarene just because he was from Nazareth. Matthew 5:20, for I say to you, if your righteousness shall not exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall not enter the kingdom of JAHUAH, never. We see that throughout history, even up to the time of the Messiah, that both the house of Israel and the house of Judah, also known as the Jews, were being led away from the true Sabbath because of their idolatry. The curse that Allah placed on them has not yet been lifted, although JAHUAH does promise that the Sabbath will be returned to them, but not until the end of days. In the meantime, the truth will be given to those that fear the name of JAHUAH, just as Malachi said. We would do well to heed the fourth commandment of JAHUAH. Only he can give us salvation. We cannot produce it ourselves. Simple compliance will produce blessings from our Allah. Defiance and endless arguing against the Sabbath will only result in ultimate condemnation. The Sabbath is the oldest institution in the world, and our Creator considered it so important, so necessary for his human creation that he kept it himself. The crowning achievement in his creation of the vast universe, the last act he performed, was to rest on the seventh day. His example is unmistakable. The fourth commandment requiring Sabbath observance is as important as the 9 other commandments in the royal law. The Creator's true Sabbath shall be restored, as noted in Isaiah 66:23. And it shall come to pass that from one Rosh Chodesh to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says JAHUAH. The Sabbath has always been, is today, and forever shall be set aside and sanctioned by JAHUAH as his day of rest and communion between mankind and himself. There is not a single verse in the entire Bible that declares that the Sabbath was ever done away with or changed from the original pattern in Genesis. A time is coming when everyone will take sides between the Sabbath of the fourth commandment and the counterfeit Sabbaths established by the man of sin. This persecuting power will compel the worship of the beast by insisting on the observance of the Sabbath he has instituted, proclaiming it to be the seventh day. Thus it would appear then that JAHUAH intended for us to conclude each cycle of weeks with rest, as it is the last thing in the creation week that JAHUAH draws our attention to by ceasing from his labor. He added this one and only day and this one and only purpose, so we could spend holy time with our holy Creator, which is the most beautiful sign that he is our Eloah and we are his children. Hebrews 10:26 through 29 says there is no sacrifice to cover willful sin, and it is to trample the son of Eloah underfoot and count the blood of the covenant as an unholy thing despite being under Yahuwah's grace. That's big, folks. There's no sacrifice to cover willful sin. The blood does not cover us when we willfully sin. Hebrews 10:28. If anyone did not regard the law of Moses, that one dies without pities. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. If anyone did not regard the law of Moses, that one dies without pities on the word of 2 or 3 witnesses. Here Paul is quoting Torah, Deuteronomy 17:6. Hebrews 10:29. How much worse punishment do you think will be thought worthy to receive the one trampling the son of Eloah, having counted common the blood of the covenant in which he was sanctified, and having insulted the Spirit of grace? Wow, that is really deep, brothers and sisters. Very deep. Again, it all comes down to the covenant. Are we supposed to believe in the Messiah? Yes. Because he gave us the better covenant. But we can only be in covenant when we follow the commands of his Father. The 4th commandment, guard and hallow the Sabbath. The Messiah says to those who practice lawlessness, those not following Torah, he will deny access to the kingdom. So right here we see it's more than just believing that he is the Messiah. We need to follow the law and able to be accepted in the kingdom of his Father. Most people understand that it is morally wrong to lie, steal, murder, to worship idols, or take Yahuwah's name in vain, etc. But the reason Satan, Lucifer, Hallel, he comes by many names, is so successful in keeping so many from the Sabbath truth is because it is easy for him to convince the multitudes that it is not important. Sadly, most do not see the breaking of the Sabbath to be morally wrong. The question is, does JAHUAH see the breaking of the Sabbath day as morally wrong? If it is important to Eloah, then it has to be important to us. Since JAHUAH made his Sabbath day part of the royal commandments, it becomes a sin to break the Sabbath, as sin is breaking any of the commandments. Sin is the reason the Messiah died on the cross for us to begin with. Not so we can continue in it without consequence, but that we would live as he lived, obeying the Father's commands. It does not get more serious than that. All JAHUAH asks from us is one single, solitary day in 7. We still have the other 6 days to do as we please. Is one day an unreasonable request from our Creator? Many claim to love him with all their heart, might, and soul, and yet how do most respond to seeking out his Sabbath? Hosea prophesied that Yahuwah's people would perish for a lack of knowledge, which does not sound fair, but then he explains that it is because they would reject knowledge in regards to the commandments of Allah. So he, in return, would reject them. Considering how many people have rejected knowledge on the Sabbath commandment, this sadly makes perfect sense. Everyone has different ideas about the seventh-day Sabbath. When there is so much confusion and conflicting information, you know that deception reigns, and one seriously needs to investigate to find what truth really is, especially when the consequences for deliberate sin is to be left out of Yahuwah's kingdom. Many do not understand that if we are in the Messiah, then we are spiritual Israel and the Israel of Allah. If we reject this truth, we cannot be under the new covenant. So this is the conclusion of our study on the Sabbath day, and I hope you have found edification in it, as we are certainly blessed to bring it to you. And we give all praise and glory to the Most High. And until we meet again, I'm going to wish you Shalom. Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.